Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is John Van Lunen, and you are listening to Treasures of the Outer Banks, episode 22. In this episode, I talk with Joe Tauber, and this is a special episode because Joe Tauber is not only a treasure of the Outer Banks, but he is also a graduate of Northwood High School, Silver Spring, Maryland, class of 73. I am also a graduate of Northwood High School in Silver Spring, class of 84. It's actually a funny story how we bumped into each other. It was just this last September. I'm in Plymouth, North Carolina, which is a small country town, and a football game's going on. I'm on the sideline just hanging out. Joe Tauber is one of the officials, and he stops by and we start talking. And he mentioned something about refereeing, officiating in Maryland. And I said, well, I'm from Maryland, and I went to high school in Silver Spring. He said, what high school? I said, Northwood. He said, so did I. I quickly found out that his mom was the owner of a great deli we used to have down here on the Outer Banks. It was called Mrs. T's. It was at milepost 10, and it's located right where the Staples store is currently located. As a matter of fact, Staples is the business that pushed her out of business, which is disappointing, but it happens. And we had a great talk. I was able to get him in here and sit down, and we talked about how he started wrestling at Northwood High School, how that shaped his life. We talk about Montgomery County connections, PG County connections. He actually knew my former brother-in-law, Jeff Wood. I guess they went to school together at Northwood about the same time. We talk about officiating, wrestling. We talk about community service, leadership, local education, community, and a few stories in the judicial world. Anyway, I think this was a great talk. We go all over the place. I mentioned some old friends from Northwood, so I hope you Northwood people share this with other people from the school. I think everybody will appreciate it. It's not just a Outer Banks episode, but it's also a Northwood and Maryland episode. I think you'll like this episode, so sit back and enjoy. So it's around 1999, and I'm in a deli in Nags Head. It's called Mrs. T's, and I see some old photographs of a wrestling team on the wall, a bunch of them. And they said the Wild Bunch on them too. I remember that. And I'm looking at them, and I asked Mrs. T, who's behind the counter, I said, what wrestling team is that? And, I think she kind of dismissed me because who had ever heard of Northwood High School? Well, I had heard of Northwood High School, graduate in 1984. And so we started talking about that a little bit. And the next time I was in there, I saw a tall gentleman behind the counter, one of her sons. And he proceeds to tell me that he wrestled at Northwood High School, and his coach was Mr. Kuchnick, who was my science teacher, good guy. And the way I was told was that this young man, when he was in high school wrestling, was injured on a mat and started to bleed, and Kuchnick grabbed him by his hair, dragged him off the mat, and said, I don't want you bleeding all over my mat. So I'm here with Joe Tauber. And Joe, that was your older brother or younger brother?
Older brother.
That's your older brother. What's his name?
Jeff
Tauber. And you both wrestled for Northwood High School, and you were just telling me a little bit about that experience. Could you kind of sum up, wrestling at Northwood High School back in the early 1970s?
Well, that was the first year Jerry Williamson and Tony Kuchnick took over when I was a sophomore. And as I related to you, there was a 10-year difference between the coaches and me anyway, 15 to 25. And so they were trying to build a program.
Yeah.
And so they went out and recruited kids from the hallway.
Yeah.
Hey, you'd be good and this, that, and the other. And so they brought a number of people into the room to fill the lineup. In fact, we had both a varsity and a JV.
Right.
And they worked us pretty hard. They wanted us to be successful, and they had a vision in terms of what it would take to be successful. And I'd say most of us, if not all of us, bought into this. Their what they were selling,
right?
And we were very successful that year. We went from like 0-9, I think, the year before to 9-3.
Nice.
My first year, and we had our one guy took second in the state that year.
Nice.
He was somebody that I looked up to. He was a tough kid, tough guy, and I kind of wanted to be, to reach that success that he did.
Right. And how was your success at Northwood High School as a wrestler?
I think I finished dual meet wise 35-3-1, so nice. I didn't lose a lot. I didn't like to lose. And I wrestled in the state finals at 112, and I wrestled the same guy from Montgomery County in the county finals, regional finals, and the state finals. And this was a guy who was a two-time state champ, his sophomore year. So, and I always say I just lost to a better wrestler.
Yeah.
This is a guy that had 5 years experience on me before I ever stepped on a wrestling mat, and it was just something that you had to accept. He was, not that I didn't fight him.
Right.
And I didn't like to lose to him, but
right.
He was just a better wrestler.
Yeah. At the end of the day, sometimes we just have to accept that,
Correct.
It's part of growing up, I think.
It is.
And you kind of carried that enthusiasm for wrestling here to the Outer Banks, haven't you?
I have. Wrestling's been a good vehicle for me in a lot of different ways. And I try to tell kids goal setting.
Right.
And I try to look them in the eye and tell them there's no fairy godmother that's going to take you from point A to point B. It's like what you put into it, how hard you want to work to accept those challenges and to be successful.
Right.
So wrestling told me you set goals and you work towards those goals.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of accountability and there's a lot of looking in the mirror and saying, are you doing enough to be successful?
Right. And it's you hit the name right on the head. Accountability. It's there's only one person to really blame at the end of the day. I mean, I guess you could. If you didn't have good coaching, you could blame your coaching to a point, but at the end of the day, it's just you on the mat, and it's pretty obvious, how the evaluation process is going.
Well, in wrestling, it's not subjective. It's like,
right.
Performance.
Yep.
And it's you against somebody of your similar weight.
Yep.
And it's like whose hand gets raised.
Right.
And I'll just tell you a story. I was doing the Big Ten championship between.
You're a referee, just so everybody knows.
Okay, I was refereeing the Big Ten championship, and it was Iowa kid versus Ohio State kid, and the Ohio State kid ends up being a 4-time national champ.
Wow.
And the kid from Iowa was no slouch either. He was a national champ as well. But they're wrestling, and I think the kid from Iowa is favored because he was just favored, and he ends up losing 5-2 to the Ohio State kid. And so I bring him into the center of the match, and now the Iowa kid wants to fight him.
Okay.
And I'm thinking to myself, so I bear hugged the Iowa kid, probably because I wanted to prevent from taking a team point away from Iowa, and just to calm him down.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking to myself, I said, he just kicked your ass. And now you want to fight him. That doesn't make sense. I said, go back into the wrestling room, work a little harder.
You had your chance.
And maybe at the NCAA championship, you can beat the guy.
Yeah.
But, anyway. So that's what it goes. It's that wrestling mentality that has is very pervasive in my thinking.
Right. And so what have you done? Do you do some youth wrestling on the Outer Banks?
I do middle school, high school. In fact, I had a match yesterday at Northeastern.
Okay.
And tomorrow I'm driving up to Maryland to do a high school tournament.
Wow.
2-day high school tournament, and then I do some events in Chattanooga College, and then I'm doing something at Hampton, Virginia.
Okay.
So I move around. I'm under contract with the Big Tens, but I'm kind of winding down in terms of the traveling and stuff like that. So.
Okay. Do you do any teaching? I mean, are
Coaching.
You helping the younger guys come up at all, or?
No, I almost kind of think like they're in good hands.
Okay.
I think, and I just think it's so important that kids have that love of the sport, and I think drilling is important for wrestling, just like it is in other sport. You've got to. It's got to be. You can't have that fraction of a second to think about what you're going to do because your opponent's going to do it. Yeah. So you've got to be. You've got to get your mind ready that you just operate.
Yeah. Muscle memory.
Thinking. Correct. And so that's what I. I've coached before. I've coached in Maryland, and I actually helped coach First Flight High School when I first came down here.
Okay.
And I like coaching, but I also like the benefits of wrestling in terms of the discipline, the accountability, but also making sure that they do what they need to be successful. In other words, the academics.
Yeah.
And just as a story, I walk into a locker room at Penn State or Michigan or whatever, and I do my my little discussion with the guys on what my expectations are, and I'll look at one of the wrestlers and I go, "You doing your homework?" And they go, "Why is the ref asking me if I'm doing my homework?" But it's just kind of break the ice a little bit. But that's important to me.
Yeah.
You know, that in yesterday, same thing. Kids come out of the night, you doing your homework? And I don't overdo it. I try not to overdo
right.
it, or embarrass anybody. But it's kind of like, I want to make sure they're student athletes.
Yep.
You know, and that's important to me.
Excellent.
Athletics can teach you a lot of lessons.
Oh, definitely, yeah. So let's back up a little bit. Tell me, your mom had a deli at Capital Plaza in Prince George's County. Do you remember that?
Absolutely.
Nice.
I started working for her when I was 9 years old.
Is that right?
I couldn't even reach the counter.
Is that right?
I used to have a little box that I used to stand on to wait on.
And were you guys living in Silver Spring?
We were.
And you just drive on over to Capital Plaza and get going. So my dad lived in Lanham. I was born in Cheverly, which is Cheverly's right down the street from Capital Plaza. And I remember Capital Plaza, and it was the place where my mom would, go shopping or something like that until we moved to Silver Spring. And so it's funny that there's, even more connections. So at what point does she decide to pack up the deli at Capital Plaza and take it down to Nags Head?
That's a great question. I can tell you they had a lot of Cuban friends.
Okay.
And one of her Cuban friends was an artist down here. And if you go into the Wright Memorial, there are a lot of portraits that were painted by this guy.
Is that right?
Yeah. Louis Mesa is his name. So he stayed down here, I think, during the summer months to avoid the heat in Florida, Miami. Okay. And so I think he convinced my parents to come down here in 1986. So my mother's lease, I guess, was over in Capital Plaza, and she decided to, leave.
Yeah.
And so my mother was one of those people that if she wanted to do something, she was going to do it,
Yeah. And where were you in this whole process? You were out of college by then.
By that time, I was practicing law in Maryland.
Okay.
And married, starting a family.
Okay.
So. And
did you think this was a crazy idea? Or?
No.
Okay.
No.
You were totally on board with it.
I didn't think anything my mother did was crazy. I had so much respect for my mom and kind of emulated her.
Sounds like she was a pretty strong woman.
She was extremely strong.
Yeah, that's great.
She was extremely strong. And
so she comes down here. Do you know how that transition went? Did she struggle off the bat, or was she successful off the bat?
I think it was a case of people getting to know her and getting to know the business. But I think once they came in, and I have stories, people tell me stories about, them going into my mom's restaurant. And
just for a second, was it always at that location where the Staples is right now? Okay.
Yes. And how much not only did they appreciate the food, but appreciated her.
Sure.
And I can digress a little bit. Ever since she was in business in '64, people would come into the store, males particularly, and they would refer to as mom.
Yeah.
And I actually got insulted by it because that's my mother.
That was competition.
That's not your mother. That's my mother. So I would call her by her first name or something because but she was so kind and generous, and guys would. I remember one guy coming in and said, she would feed people if they didn't have any money.
Yeah.
And God, she was just such a generous person.
Nice.
And kind.
Nice.
She could be tough though.
I'd imagine. I mean, sounds like she ran that place by herself, more or less, for a long time.
She did, and she had certain standards.
Yeah.
She had high standards. She expected you to keep up with those standards. And I looked at her, and I always tell a story about my mom, and I spoke at her funeral, and I said, if my mom swept the floor, or my mom mopped the floor, she would move stuff to get behind them. Yeah. Because this is who she was. This, her job, her performance was a reflection of her.
Yeah.
So she was going to give 110%, whatever she did, mopping floor, sweeping the floor, whatever. And the expectations were that you would do the same.
Right.
And that's where I got I'm going to give 110%.
Right.
Now I remember my oldest daughter, came down here to work for her one summer, and my mother, she's a taskmaster. She has certain expectations, and my daughter, I think, met those expectations, and they got along famously. Good. But I respected her for it.
Right.
I wanted to be like her.
Right. So When did you decide to join the family, or when did you decide to come to the Outer Banks?
I think it was 2013, and I was living in Maryland, and I just decided that I wanted to be with her because it didn't seem like she had much time on the planet.
Gotcha.
She was, health-wise, she was doing bad. And so I wanted to spend time with her.
Yep.
Yeah, I want to spend time with her. I just wanted to spend time with her.
I understand.
Yeah.
So I had the impression that maybe you came down here a lot earlier than you did. You came here after I did. So the transition from DC to here is, probably not too crazy.
Different.
It's different.
Less traffic.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
Yeah, I agree.
Most of the time. and it kind of like, with the situation that's occurring here, with the housing and stuff like that, It's like, well, any place you live and work in that Washington metropolitan area, you're driving an hour and 15 minutes, probably to work.
Yeah.
So the expectation should be down here, not necessarily that you're riding your bike to work.
Right. Right.
And I always say this community down here is like Manhattan. There's only so much of the land here for housing, and it is what it is.
Yeah, we're going to have to figure it out somehow.
Somehow.
It seems like you moved. Obviously, you were in the military, so that probably bumped you around a little bit. But the OBX is still kind of your home base, even though your mom's gone.
It is. I came down in 2013. I ran for the school board 2014, and I won. It was like a wrestling contest. I always said it's like a wrestling contest. You win by 1 point, you win.
Yeah.
And they raise your hand, and I worked hard. I mean, what I wanted to do is like, and we talked earlier about it. It's like I had a lot of success in the public school system, and I wanted kids to do that too.
Right.
And we have an obligation to them to educate them to be successful, and I wanted to be a part of that. I wanted to do what I could do to contribute to that. So I ran 2014 and won, and then I ran in 2018 and won. And basically, when I ran in 14, I said I was only going to do 2 terms because I figured somebody could come in with some additional ideas and maybe move the school system a little bit beyond what I could do. So give other people an opportunity.
So you seem to do a lot of community service. Why is that?
It's kind of like a payback. It's almost like officiating wrestling. It's paying back to things. Like I'm on the liquor board as well. Right. And I was in the liquor business as well. So I know the liquor business.
Gotcha.
I'm on the Dare Education Foundation. And that basically provides housing for teachers, affordable housing for teachers. And also gives grants to students and teachers to do things that maybe aren't in the school budget for them to do. And so I'm very proud of that. I'm also on the Jeanette's Peer Advisory Council.
Nice.
And, I think it's like paying back for what you got. And it's, at one time I was president of a senior citizen center in Milford, Delaware. Yeah. So not paying, and I didn't ask for any pay. It was just like giving back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is your military background kind of, I don't know. I feel like the people that embrace the military are the ones that want to serve, and that's kind of like a community service. So does that kind of tie in there as well a little bit?
I wanted to serve my country.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew from an early age that I wanted to serve my country. And I'll tell you a little story. I think I mentioned it earlier. I was 40 years old and decided to go to airborne school. And I went to air assault school the year before, and both schools were pretty challenging.
What is that for school?
Air assault, repelling from helicopters.
Okay, I'm with you. All right.
Yeah. And I did it because I was a senior officer, and I was basically giving legal advice to commanders. And my thinking was, well, if I'm going to give legal advice to commanders, I ought to do the things that they do. So, in the military, we have badges, I guess like Boy Scouts or whatever.
Right.
And you wear your badges. So it's clearly obvious to the people that you're talking to that you have the same badges as they have.
Okay.
And so it basically establishes a relationship, some credibility with the people that you're now dealing with. But, so I'm 40 years old, I'm walking across a field, after airborne school training. And I go, I think about it and I go, this stuff's easier compared to wrestling.
Okay.
So I brought my wrestling background in, and I go, because, yeah, I had tough training, but guess what? I'm going to go home and eat a cheeseburger.
Right.
I couldn't do that in wrestling.
Right.
So you had to, you always have to put things in perspective.
Right.
So people talk about the banning of the military, and I was in combat. I actually got a combat action badge, which is kind of in Afghanistan, but, you put things in perspective. What you've done. And basically, I remember as a 15, 16-year-old kid, what I did with wrestling. And that kind of grounds me in terms of what I can put myself through.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by the Navy SEALs. The training, the weeding out process, all that stuff just amazes me. And I feel like a lot of the guys that seem to succeed, and this is an outsider looking in, is the wrestlers, the guys that know how to push through the pain, they know the grind, they just kind of get it. I mean, I don't know.
Well, I was telling you about the wrestling tournament I do in Hampton, Virginia. I've been doing it since 1988. They always have a SEAL team recruiting team there.
Oh, do they?
Yes. For high school and college.
They got the table set up,
for
ready
high
to
school and college,
recruit
because they understand, the discipline.
Yeah.
And the sacrifice that wrestlers generally make in their sport. And I remember there was one guy, he was a Lehigh graduate, All-American, and he ended up a 3-star admiral in the Navy. But, specifically, wrestling lends itself to the sacrifice that they're asking you to do as an Army Ranger or a Navy SEAL. So, and I remember going to Coronado for a Special Forces Legal Conference and went into the SEAL training room. And right outside the door, there's a picture of a guy. And I actually know the guy. His name's Tommy Norris. Tommy was an All-American at the University of Maryland. And Tommy won the Medal of Honor as a Navy SEAL. And you've probably seen the movie, I can't remember what he rescues an Air Force pilot in Vietnam. And he got a Medal of Honor. I think it was 1971 maybe or something like that. But yeah, it's a special community. Let's put it that way.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
It's a very special community. And like you said, all the money that's spent on training for the Rangers and the special ops guys, they're a lot invested in that.
Right.
Yeah.
So they only want the best, and I get it.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No.
Because you learn that you have to depend on people.
Absolutely.
And so, you're only as strong as that weakest link. And you don't want to be that weak link.
Right. How old were you when you got in the military?
30.
Okay.
I'd gone through undergrad and law school.
Wow. Okay. And how many years did you spend in the military?
21.
Okay.
Enjoyed every moment.
And what's filling your time right now? Just officiating? Or?
I've got some projects going on.
Yeah.
I consult, and I'm kind of one of these guys that given a task or a problem and it's finding solutions to it. And I think one of my proudest moments was I was running humanitarian assistance operations in Afghanistan. And I worked with officers from 44 countries. And so my thinking was, well, how do I get these guys on board to what we're doing here? And so I always looked at, different languages, different cultures, different religions. And I said, what do we have in common? There are differences, but what do we have in common? Well, we have in common that we're parents and we have children, and we all want our children to have better lives than we had. So I said the same thing holds true for the Afghanistan people, the parents. So what are we going to do to help them have better lives for their children? So I utilized coalition assets, mostly airlift, and donations, obviously humanitarian assistance donations to deliver in Afghanistan. And, I remember one of the speeches I gave to these people was, I'm a smart guy, but I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I said, you guys are pretty smart too. And I said, collectively, we're, working together, we can accomplish some good things. Mm-hmm. And we did. We delivered 150 tons of humanitarian assistance in Afghanistan. And one of my things was the United States was heavily invested money-wise in that operation during freedom. And I wanted I wanted these other countries that signed up for the Global War on Terrorism to pony up as well.
Right.
So I'd make them pony up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So obviously, you got a lot of leadership. I could just tell you got a lot of leadership. Did this develop in law school? Did this develop in the military? Did this develop in the wrestling room? Where did this all come from?
I think I've always been a leader.
Yeah.
You know, I remember 5 years old, I used to have a gang. Kindergarten. I was pretty scrappy, but it was enhanced in wrestling. And, you know, it's kind of like you have confidence in your abilities to lead, and you set the example. And I always say, and I'll tell you a little story. I had gotten back from airborne school, and I won't mention any names though, but the boss says to me, hey, see if anybody else wants to go to airborne school. So I pulled this one guy's PT card, and he was, you know, if you looked at him, he was in pretty good shape. And I pulled his PT card, and he goes, I go, I'd like to send you to airborne school, but your PT scores are pretty low. I said, I'll give you 6 weeks to train up, and if you perform, I'll recommend you go to airborne school. He goes, nah. He goes, I met standards. I go, you don't want to set standards? You're okay with meeting standards?
Right.
And he was just very honest.
I appreciate your honesty, but now we know exactly where this guy
Well, I just
stands.
tell you, he's a Harvard Law School grad too, and he's a politician in Maryland.
Okay.
And he was just elected to office. And he served in other high offices in the state of Maryland, and it was just shocked me that people don't want to set high standards for themselves. They're actually content meeting standards.
Right.
So this goes along with, you know, how I behave every day in terms of the pressure I put on myself to meet standards or set standards, excuse me. And, you know, even when I go to the gym today, I'll be going to the gym today, and it's like the expectation is I'm going to work hard in the gym.
Yeah.
And there are going to be results that are associated with that working hard.
Right.
So, but, and I'm not afraid to lead.
Right.
I'm not afraid to lead. I mean, you've got to be prepared to lead.
Right. Was that honed in the military at all, or?
Like I said, I'm going to go back to wrestling.
Okay. That's
you
fine.
know, it was another vehicle.
Yeah.
For me to learn from other people, mentors that I had in the military, just like I had with Tony Kushnick and Jerry Williamson.
Yeah.
To learn how to be a leader, and what was expected of you being a leader. And so, when I got to the military, it was like gravitating to people that were leaders. And most of my readings are on leadership, like mostly
Right.
military leaders, and you know, Patton, MacArthur, George Washington,
Yeah.
U.S. Grant, Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee. You know, how they led people, and you know, I found that there's different ways of leading, and it's all based on the personality of the leader himself or herself. So, you know, you can't take your personality out of it, who you are,
Right.
but you can be a good leader. You know,
Yeah.
and I see that in college wrestling coaches too. I examine the programs, and I know they're different. The Ohio State coach is different from the Iowa coach, and the Penn State's different. They're all different, but they're successful.
Yeah.
You know?
They've conveyed the message somehow. They might just have different avenues
Correct.
or methods.
Correct.
Right.
So I appreciate that, and like I said, it's I study that.
Yeah.
You know,
I think that's important. I mean,
it is for me. It's because I respect people that can lead.
right.
And our leaders. And, you know, it's not, you can't be fearful of leading, or you shouldn't be a leader.
Right. I've never been in the military, but I respect the military, and I'm just always impressed with how they produce leaders. That's, in my mind, the military is not an organization that creates warmongers. It's an organization that creates leaders, and they do great things.
I've run into a lot of people in the military, both enlisted and officers, and just the level of intelligence that I've come across, and understanding what the mission is and how to accomplish the mission.
Yeah.
And just fascinated by the level of intelligence and that these guys bring to the table.
Right.
You know, it's just a lot of respect. And I just got back from Sicily. I was at a naval base there, and dealt with the Air Force, the Navy, and just just the impact, that
The U.S. or the Italian?
Well, I've worked with Italians before. Okay. I've worked with, like I said, the 44 countries, and the Italians were one of them. And worked with Arab countries, UAE, Kuwait, European countries. And, there's certain things that occur. One story I had with the Canadians, and I didn't realize this, but the Canadians only have at least at that time, a total force of 20,000 people.
Is that right?
Active duty, yeah. I go, wow, it's a big country, 20,000 people. So I was asking a captain to run a mission for me. And he got into, I think it was Lieutenant Colonel at the time, he got into this, well, we're not like the United States and, in terms of the amount of money. I go, I'm not asking you to donate anything other than a C-130 to deliver, cargo to Afghanistan. And I got it from him. But the other thing, too, is you have to take care of your people. In other words, I've lectured a general officer on that, and I don't think he appreciated it. But I said, that's how you get your stars. The guys that work for you make you look good. Yeah. But you got to take care of them. Yeah. The little things. So there's some good leaders and there's not so good leaders.
Understood.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no guarantees, and I think it boils down to their methods. Their methods are just out of whack. Yeah. Just something's not right about it.
Well, if it's all about them getting promoted and not thinking how they got there, they got to think how they got there. And it's not because of just solely what they did.
Yeah, one of the catchphrases right now is servant leadership. It's like, if you want to be a leader, you got to serve,
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Let's go backwards for just a second, back to Northwood High School. So a good friend of mine, Rob Noonan, served in the Air Force, fighter pilot. He has a question for you, and that is, he's curious as to what was the diversity like back in the early 70s compared to maybe the 80s when he and I went to high school at Northwood.
We had a huge Jewish population.
Okay.
In fact, my neighborhood on East Crest Drive, right on University Boulevard, was probably 80% Jewish.
Okay.
And if you weren't Jewish, you were obviously in the minority. But
was that part of that Jewish gang you had going on?
No. It was a diverse gang.
Okay.
It was diverse in the sense that you had some blue collar people.
Okay.
You had some middle class people, and the neighborhoods were packed with the middle class and maybe the blue collar communities and whatever. And I was just thinking about this the other day. A lot of those parents that they're like my parents came from Cuba. Okay. And this one guy, I just remember the name, Vito Passameni. Now, how many times?
What a great name.
Yeah, Vito Passameni. Now, Vito was a blue-collar guy, went to Northwood and Sligo. But, so you had that. And I think everybody got along well. We had a very small black population at Northwood at that time. Very small Hispanic population at that time. But everybody got along pretty well. I mean, we all, didn't reflect on, religion or anything like that. It just didn't seem to be an issue.
Right.
It was like who you were.
Yeah. I think, we were very diverse in the 80s, and we all, we didn't group ourselves too much. I mean, my friends were all from the whole spectrum.
Sure.
So I will say there was a big Asian push when I was in school, and that was a big thing. But I mean, we were friends with a lot of those guys too. So it doesn't sound like it was too different. June Monomere also graduated in '84, class president, former Marine. Now lives out in Hawaii, works for the government. He was curious as to, and I think we've kind of touched upon this, about how the high school is part of your consciousness right now. And it sounds like it's a big part of your consciousness because Northwood is where you got into wrestling and where you got all your experience there. And you've already kind of told me about just how much wrestling means to you and your lifestyle and thoughts and everything like that.
Well, and also the people that mentored me, my coaches, in terms of challenging me to be the best that I could be as far as wrestling is concerned, and also academically. In fact, I think I got a scholarship to the same school that Tony went to. Oh, yeah. My coach, Tony Kushnick, and
which is
Edinburgh
Edinburgh.
in PA. Yeah,
Big wrestling school.
Yeah,
right?
I was there on a wrestling scholarship, and it's like I had to make a decision to transfer back to Maryland, and I just at that point in time I couldn't do the academics in the wrestling because I knew I got recruited as an 18-pounder and a 126-pounder, and I weighed 154. I go, I'm not going through this again because it was pure torture. I just didn't think, and I have a lot of praise for the Division I wrestlers in particular that can juggle that schedule to cut the weight and do the academics. So, as I mentioned earlier, I have a lot of respect for those kids that can do that, and it's not easy. It's really not easy because any Division I athlete is. There's a lot of demands on your time.
Yeah. And
juggling that schedule is very impressive.
Right.
But I think I'd mentioned, as I said, I had lived with my coaches during the season. So,
but just for the record, because I don't think we recorded that part, Joe had to live with his coaches so they could keep him from food.
Basically, that was it. And then I think I told you my brother wrestled 185 and I was the 98-pounder, or the 98-pounder. And so I was cutting a lot of weight, and I actually had a refrigerator downstairs, and my own refrigerator where I put stuff for me, and I had to put a chain around it because my brother would go into it. And I popped my brother. I got mad at my brother. I popped him in the ribs, broke his ribs.
Really?
Yeah. Because he went in my food.
That's hey, I'm a little territorial too, so maybe we should stay away from food today. But that's hilarious.
Well, you learn what's basic in life, though.
Right.
Eating and drinking is survival.
You take that away from somebody,
it's survival.
It might start a fight.
Yeah, it's like I said, as long as I get food once in a while, I'm okay.
Right.
It's a very basic thing, basic need.
So just because I'm probably going to share this podcast with a bunch of my Maryland friends, you still go up to Maryland quite a bit to officiate. You officiate some wrestling up there, a little bit of football.
No football, just wrestling.
No? Okay.
Like this weekend, I'm going to Howard County to referee, and then 2 weeks ago, I think I was at McDaniel College doing a Division III tournament.
Right.
And I mean, I've gone up to University of Maryland, done wrestling at Maryland. I'll tell you a funny story if I could.
Yeah.
I started refereeing in 1976. In 1978, I'm a junior at University of Maryland. I think it was junior at University of Maryland. But I get assigned to do the Maryland-West Virginia match. So I'm in Coalfield House.
I can't believe they let an underclassman.
Well, here's the rest of the story. So I'm at the table, and the guy goes, well, before the match, we announced the referee and what school you graduated from. So he goes, what's your name? I go, Joe Tauber. He goes, what school did you graduate? I said, I'm a student here at the University of Maryland. He goes, I can't say that. So he goes,
what high school?
So he goes, today's referee is Joe Tauber from McGill University, Toronto, Canada. So he put me as far away from Maryland as he could. Now, of course, the Maryland coaches knew me, and the West Virginia coaches knew me too. So
yeah,
but it's the way it was,
Yeah, no, I get it. That's funny. So wrapping it up pretty soon here. Anything you want to promote on the Outer Banks? Any special projects you got going on?
Well, from the DEF perspective, Their Education Foundation, obviously we have the teacher housing, and we're looking at building 8 more units at that Run Hill unit that we have now.
Okay.
I think there are 24 units there. And we'd like it to make it affordable for teachers to come into the community.
Right.
That are maybe just getting out of college.
Right.
But can't afford to live here. So the Dare Education Foundation provides that affordable housing for them. And so we're contemplating building 8 more units. We've got 12 units down in Hatteras. We have 24 now.
Oh, wow.
in KDH. And we want to build an additional 8. But, with the housing materials and labor that's going on now, we've got to make sure that it's affordable for their education foundation.
Right.
And talked about bringing a JRTC program here.
Oh yeah. What branch?
Well, that's 4 years ago I discussed it. I went up to Camden and studied their program.
Okay.
And I just wanted a program. It didn't matter. But
Yeah.
Air Force would be the right program
Sure.
because this is the birthplace of aviation.
Of course.
Yeah. So it just makes sense. So I kind of pushed them this year to get a JRTC program here.
Where are the points of friction? Is it the Board of Ed? Is it the superintendent? Is it the military? Or is it, just everybody has to come to the table?
That's an interesting
Sounds like a question we might want to avoid or
No.
save it for a later day.
I don't avoid questions.
Okay.
I'm a big believer in JRTC program. And I am because it gives kids options. Mm-hmm. Kids that may feel that they don't have other options in the public school system and you lose them. But this offers an option to them. And it doesn't say that you go into the military, but it exposes you to the discipline, the accountability, and things of that nature, which a lot of kids need. And so if they can learn from that program, then let's give it a shot. I mean, the government splits the fee with us, basically.
Okay.
And so I've been pushing it for years.
Okay.
I've been pushing vocational training for years because, and I say this, it's like, okay, what are the metrics for success in a school system?
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, the metrics seem to be graduation rates and how many kids going to college, at least in Dare County.
Right.
So I think you can hand anybody a piece of paper saying they're a high school graduate.
Right.
Okay. And then if you've got 60% that are going to college, then my concerns are, well, what about the other 40%?
Right.
What are we doing for them?
Right.
I mean, we're obligated to teach everybody, not just the kids that are going to college. So teach them skills that I've talked to business owners here and they go, well, kid that works for me anywhere from 1 to 4 years can make $65,000 to $95,000 a year.
Nice.
Now that's middle class.
Yeah.
And I think, and I've said this before, the universities have convinced parents you can't be middle class unless you go to college.
Right.
So parents are going, my kid's got to go to college.
Right.
Well, no, he doesn't. If that's not his interest or her interest, then, maybe the trades are their interest.
Right.
But we have to provide those services. And I almost mentioned this before. I want like standalone vocational training school.
Yeah.
On the Dare County, Currituck County line so we could share the expenses with the two counties. But my concern was about 40%. I've had conversations with our superintendents. I go, kid walks up to our school system and doesn't really like school, but we have to market that there's something inside that school system that's going to benefit the kid.
Right. Otherwise, why is he going to want to get up and go to school?
Correct. Other than, he's placating his parents because he's going to get that piece of paper. But what's it mean to him?
Yeah.
And that's what I always question here. Are we doing enough to make that piece of paper worth something to that kid?
Right.
And so I've worked with COA to expand their vocational training courses. And, the other thing, too, is that, like that apprentice school in Virginia.
Yep.
It's a great school. It's free. You get paid to go to school.
One of my lacrosse players went up through there, and what he was making by his second year was almost 6 digits.
Yeah.
It was like $90,000 he was making his second year out of high school.
Right. So we have to be a little smarter. Like I said, I came through the public system myself. We both went to Northwood, obviously. But are we doing enough for everybody?
Right.
And I think it just takes a little effort for that, say 40%. I wrote an article about 6 years ago. It's Earn While You Learn. For those kids that have no expectation of going to college, you work half a day, you go to school half a day.
Yeah.
But you learn a skill.
Yeah.
And you come out and, again, the parents' ambition for their children is at least middle class.
Yeah.
And so, and they don't incur the debt that they do by going to college for 4 to 6 years and coming out with a piece of paper that doesn't guarantee them a job.
Right. And
I will say one thing about my children is that when they went to college and they were going to go to college, that they were going to get a degree in something that makes them marketable.
Right.
Okay, not just a piece of paper.
Yeah.
There either, But so again, as a school board member and as a community member, we have an obligation, to make sure our children are successful. And it's one of the things, again, coming back to the wrestling, what it takes to be successful.
Yeah.
And the dedication, the hard work, and so.
Yeah. A simple little story. So for years, I owned a water sports business, and once in a while, when you're fixing a kayak or a sailboat, you got to use a pop rivet gun. And I have a pop rivet gun laying around, and multiple times I would ask a college kid, hey, here's a pop rivet gun, go fix that thing. They had no idea how to use a pop rivet gun. Yeah. But I learned how at Eastern Junior High in Silver Spring, Maryland. Mr. Warner, the industrial arts teacher.
Yeah. Well, I'll also tell you a story. When I was going to University of Maryland, I was working at a liquor store on Kenilworth and Eastern Avenue. And it was it opened up at 6 a.m., closed at 12 a.m. So one of
I hate to ask who was showing up at 6 a.m., but keep going.
Yeah, so... it was a tiny hole-in-the-wall business, but it was a very profitable business. And so I graduated from the University of Maryland, and I said to my boss, I said, Sam, Sam lived in Chevrolet, by the way.
Okay.
And I said, Sam, I learned more from you than my 4 years at the University of Maryland.
Isn't that funny?
I said, I should have been paying you tuition.
Right, exactly.
And just how to deal with people.
Yeah.
How to deal with people. And, for me to get through Maryland and to law school was just checking boxes.
Right.
And so, but what did you actually learn in terms of experiences? You learn, law school, you learn analytical skills, think like a lawyer and things like that.
Right.
But it's dealing with people that's the important part. Communication. And I use that with wrestling a lot. When I have, 15,000 people screaming at me and I got coaches coming to the table, it's like how you communicate with them. And it's like, and I tell people I run a wrestling match like a courtroom, and I'm the judge, and the coaches are the attorneys for the athletes.
For their clients.
Yeah, and I expect them to advocate for their clients.
Right.
But it's how they, how they do that. And if they come over to the table and it's like, hey, look, I saw something different, and I can give them my viewpoint and what I saw. Well, you can agree to disagree, but you're not calling each other's names,
right,
and stuff like that, because that goes nowhere. And I remember having a conversation with a constituent here who didn't agree with me on my masking policy. And so I said, look, there are very few facts in the world. There are a lot of opinions. I said, my opinions are different than your opinions, obviously. I said, but we can have a conversation, we can have a discussion, and you can tell me what your opinions are, and I'll tell you what my opinions are. And that doesn't make my opinion right or your opinion right, but we're just having a dialogue here.
Right.
So it's kind of like, with wrestling or anything like that, you're having a dialogue with a person because they're asking you a question. It's like, let's have a dialogue. I'll tell you what I saw.
Yeah.
And we can agree to disagree, but let's keep it professional. I don't need to call you a name because you disagree with me. And that's the problem we get into, I think, when you're trying to have a discussion with somebody and then you can make it personal.
Right.
It's not personal. It's like we can agree to disagree.
Right.
And just keep the name calling out of the equation.
I just finished a great book on negotiations, and it was written by a former FBI negotiator. And I think one of the big points brought from that book was talk with empathy. Don't attack, because once you attack somebody verbally, they get defensive, mm-hmm, and everything goes down the crapper really quick. But if you show a little empathy and, keep your cool, then that aggressiveness, that ego kind of gets put in the back seat, and then you can talk and actually solve problems.
Yeah. I agree with that wholeheartedly, because like I said, with wrestling, you've got guys that, national champs, gold medal winners that are competing in college still. And the coaches have certain expectations, and it's like, okay, well, I've got to be the guy that comes in there that's composed, okay, doesn't lose my composure. And it's also the reminder I give to the athletes: take that split second to think about before you say or do something that can get you into a jam. So let's think about what we say or do before we say or do it. And I do love negotiating, I do.
You've probably developed those skills pretty well through law school and working with corporations and all that other good stuff.
Yeah, I've settled a lot of cases. One of my clients was Safeway Supermarkets, so I used to get a lot of slip and falls.
Oh yeah.
And my objective was to know more about the person suing my client than the attorney representing that client. So I could always, I always had more information on their client, because I don't want to say they were lazy, but they just had a large volume of cases, and they weren't overly concerned about this individual client that they had, and I was like trying to protect my client's interests. Right. So I would make sure that I knew more about their client than they did.
And that was another point brought up in the negotiation book was, what does this person really want? They come to the table asking for something, but maybe there's a motivation, maybe there's something else, and that's what they talked about. They do the homework, find out as much as you can. So, yeah.
And I've also learned in negotiating, never make the first offer.
Right.
Right. And like you said, find out what they want.
Yeah.
And then you can counter,
Right.
And
there's even tricks. If I ask you, how much do you want for that? There's tricks to deflect that question and circumnavigate it and then spin it around.
So, absolutely. Yeah. And just telling you one of the stories I had with one of the judges in Baltimore City. I was trying a case in Baltimore City for Safeway, and we were in the settlement process, and this judge had a history of being very intimidating, especially female attorneys, so I hear. But anyway, so I'm going to a settlement conference with him in Baltimore City, and we're sitting down, and he looks at me. He's like 6'4", looks at me and says, "Call your client up and get X amount of dollars." I go, "I'm not calling my client up until I understand that this is what the plaintiff's attorney is going to settle for." So he makes both of us go out, right? So I call my client out in California, and I go, "This is a settlement judge who doesn't mean anything," right? So, and this is, you learn from wrestling, you don't back down.
Right.
But he, so I come back and I tell my client, I go, he's a settlement judge, he's not going to try the case, so I don't think the case is worth this much money. So I go back to the judge and I go, "We're not settling the case, we're going to trial." So I get a call from the clerk's office on Friday, "You want a trial on Monday?" And guess who the judge is? The same guy, which is unusual, but he particularly assigned this case to himself so he could help his buddy, who was a lawyer.
Okay.
So I'm in chambers, and I go, "Judge, I'm going to ask you to recuse yourself." And one of my friends who was also on the bench with him said, "Be prepared for World War III." So he goes, "What's the basis?" So I said, "You've had a 30-year relationship with the guy, and blah, blah, blah. You shared office space, and so on and so forth." And I go, "I don't think my client can get a fair trial." So, of course, he denies my motion, and we go out. He goes, "Let's put it on the record." So we go in the courtroom, and we got the stenographer taking notes, and I'm cross-examining a judge, which doesn't happen every day.
Wow.
But I'm not backing down.
Right.
Because I think my client deserves a fair trial. So he goes, so I start questioning him about his relationship with the attorney. Well, what the judge forgot to tell me in chambers was that this attorney had represented him on a personal injury case. No. So the attorney said, "Well, Judge, I think you better get out of the case." So, but I wasn't backing down.
Yeah.
I wasn't backing down. I was putting it on the record. And then next time I saw the guy, he goes, how did he phrase it? He goes, "No offense taken," or something like that, or whatever about his.
Okay.
I go, "Nah. Yeah. As long as you give my clients fair trial.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that."
Yeah.
So, but I wasn't backing down from the guy.
Right. And that's a total wrestling move. You just can't
be intimidated by people.
There's nowhere to hide. You can't leave, you're not going to leave the mat early. That's not even an option. Yeah. You're just going to have to finish it out,
Well, one of the things I've learned, like, I'm gonna drop some names here, okay? General Tommy Franks, worked with him. I've met congressmen and all that stuff. It's like, you know what? They put their pants on just like we do.
Right.
You know what I mean? You look them in the eye, and I'm not intimidated by somebody that has a title.
Right.
And it's like, don't try to tell me I'm wrong just because you have a title.
Right.
And Tommy Franks was a great guy.
Yeah.
I'm walking down the hall opposite directions. The guy thumps me in the chest.
Good leader?
Great leader.
Yeah.
Great leader. I just, let you do your job.
Nice.
That's what you want. Let them, you do your job.
Do you have any mentors that, in the military or in law school? Or?
I have one guy I still keep up with. He was a JAG. And you were talking about FBI agent. He was a former FBI agent, counterterrorism guy.
Okay.
That I still keep in touch with. And I was a captain at the time. He was a full bird colonel. And I'm sitting at the table with him. One of the things that he said at that point in time was, when you leave someplace, make it better than when you found it.
Right.
And I still remember that. And I still live it,
Right.
Am I putting in what I'm doing better than when I found it?
Right.
And I'm so grateful for all the people that I've had that were my mentors. And,
nice.
And I've been very fortunate to have some great mentors.
Right.
My mother.
Sure.
My wrestling coaches, the Army, some attorneys, some judges. In fact, one of my friends in Baltimore City, if I had another older brother, he would be it. He was just a very profound, smart man, and I learned a lot from him. And I'll tell you a little story about him, if you don't mind. He's trying a murder case in Baltimore City, and so I come in the courtroom looking like a lawyer, and he sees me. He goes, "Mr. Tauber, could you please approach the bench?" So I have to climb up this step to get to where he is on the bench, and he puts his hand over Mike. He goes, "You want to play golf tomorrow?"
Nice.
I go, "You're in, Judge." So we go out, and the thing is that you have relationships with judges, but you didn't expect special treatment,
Right.
Just
if
professionalism.
they're professionals,
be
they
professional.
do their job.
And if my case isn't good enough, then I lose. I mean, I understand that. And but I will tell you another story if you don't mind. Howard County District Court, Circuit Court judge. We're trying a case, and I got a client who's a bad actor. Shoves a sawed-off shotgun in another guy's chest on a drug deal.
Jeez.
So the jury convicts my client, and judge turns around and gives him 17 years, and he says, basically, you come out of the ghettos of Baltimore and come into our pristine county and commit these crimes. And I go, whoa, didn't expect that.
Yeah.
So anyway, the Baltimore Sun is in the courtroom, and they report it. And so I get a call from the Judicial Disabilities Commission about that comment. And I go, well, I certainly wouldn't have made the comment. I said, but, I think he gave my guy a fair trial, and he gave him what he thought was an acceptable sentence. So anyway, in the meantime, I get deployed to Afghanistan, and I come back, and there's a little placard on the judge's bench. It says like $14,000 in change. And on the other side of the placard, it says, "Don't say a word." Well, that's what it cost him to get out of that jam.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Who fined him?
The Judicial Disabilities Commission.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't actually a fine. It's what it cost his legal costs to defend against it.
Right.
And so, it's kind of like you learn in court, like good judges, bad judges, and the good judges control the courtroom, but do it in a respectful manner. They treat people well.
So you still think he was a good judge? He just made a offhand comment he should not have made.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and he couldn't contain himself. He would make comments like I was trying another case in front of him.
Okay. So he had a habit of.
He had a habit. And I'll tell you the other case. I'm representing a company out of Jersey, and it was a plaintiff who claimed that he was assaulted by the manager. And so we're in court, and we're picking a jury, and the jury comes in, and the judge looks around, and he goes, "There's not enough minorities in the court on the jury pool." So, and the plaintiff was a minority. And so I go up to the judge and I go, Judge, this is Howard County.
Yeah.
Population 7% minority. I go, it's well represented back there.
Yeah.
So he goes, well, I'm going to postpone the trial until we get a better pool. So I said, well, what happens if we come back and we have the same number here? He goes, we're going to try the case. Well, I found out the judge had a tea time. So I said, Judge, you owe me.
Yeah, really.
I'll let it slide, but you owe me.
Oh, man.
So there's kind of things that, just you could write a book on those things.
Yeah, kind of irk you a little bit. I get it.
Well, you kind of have to go with the flow.
Right. You got pick your fights, right?
Yeah, I'm going to be in front of him again.
Right.
So pick your fights.
Yeah. Well, Joe, the show is called Treasures of the Outer Banks. You're definitely a treasure. Appreciate you coming out today and sharing those stories. That's great. Your mom, definitely a treasure. Probably a treasure back in PG County, Montgomery County, and even Dare County. So great to connect with you. Just definitely made my day. I appreciate you coming out.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
My pleasure.
A big thank you to Joe Tauber for sitting down and talking to me. Always a pleasure. He was here for 10 years and I never realized he was a grad of Northwood High School, which means I should probably really pay attention and get to know some of the people on our school board. But it was great catching up with an old Northwood alum. I hope you enjoyed it as well. And don't forget, if you enjoy this podcast, you can leave a review at Apple Podcast or Stitcher or Spotify. I would greatly appreciate it. And since this is the last podcast before Christmas, I want to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas. I hope you enjoy it with friends and family. And until next time, make it a good one.